Yeah, sorry about that.
In-game demo of Halo 2.
After the success of Halo Combat Evolved, it's no surprise that its sequel would be highly anticipated. Where the first game innovated the way console shooters played with its twin-stick controls, Halo 2 did the same for its multiplayer component, with an intuitive interface that connected players across the world. Whether it was by design or accident from Bungie, its snappy and responsive gameplay, combined with its button glitches, made it a particular favorite among many fans. It was also the last Halo game on PC for a good decade or so, until MCC rolled on the block for the platform, and with it came along Halo 2 Anniversary. Its transition to PC through MCC has been good for the most part, except for some glaring issues where elites couldn't dual wield, or a glitch where bullets teleported towards other players.
Oh my god, I'm spitting bars, bro. You see this?
Most of these have been addressed, and in my opinion is at a pretty good state based on what I played. While it's disappointing that these issues were even there to begin with, the overall experience has been solid. Basic settings concerning field of view, centered crosshairs, and variable frame rate work perfectly fine, with my only issue at the time of writing this is the lack of options for the oversized crosshair. It's clear that the developer Saber Interactive had a different design direction when it came to remastering Halo 2. While their first attempt was mainly concerned with keeping its visuals somewhat consistent with Halo Reach, it also came across as more of a reinterpretation than anything else, with a drastic change in tone and atmosphere in many areas. Levels like 343 Guilty Spark have been widely criticized for changing what should be a swamp to a tropical rainforest. People seem to dislike CE Anniversary for the most part, but I don't know, I thought it was pretty okay. The same can't be said for Halo 2 Anniversary, which straight up looks like a better version of the original, with more detailed textures, geometry, and lighting, which gives the environment much more character than it's ever had. It even keeps the unique feature of being able to switch between the old and new graphics, which really makes you appreciate just how much effort the developer had to go through to reimagine the game's world in the same style. And unlike the first game, you can even switch during the cutscenes. I know fans are going to hate me for saying this, but Halo 2 has always looked a bit rough around the edges. When you compare the trailers to the release version, it's clear that Bungie wanted a more detailed lighting engine, but either due to the power constraints of the Xbox or its infamously rushed development of 10 months, they had to settle for something in between, and the result seemed a bit off. Halo 2 is a bit of a flat-looking game, and this issue is further exacerbated by the Windows Vista port they used, which contained the missing effects that didn't survive the porting process. The downgrades aren't as drastic as Halo CE's port, but it's still worth pointing out. Regardless, Halo 2's visual shortcomings works in the Anniversary's favour. I'd even say that the difference between both graphics is greater than the first game. That being said, it's not a completely faithful remaster. Some areas like Earth put an emphasis on an orange colour palette to achieve a war-torn atmosphere. The Anniversary opted for a drier palette that evokes a more desolate tone, much like a desert, which I feel is more appropriate given the emptiness of the cities and tunnels. That doesn't mean all changes were made for the better. In the mission, The Oracle, you encounter a fight between the Flood and the Heretics beneath a transparent surface, but it's obscured by a fog or mist, preventing players from seeing what's actually happening and leaving it to our imagination. In the Anniversary, it's completely clear, which brings down the mysterious atmosphere a bit. Like the first game, it utilizes reused assets. The weapon models are probably the most obvious examples. A lot of it was lifted from Halo Reach with a new texture applied to it. This isn't something that concerns me, but I can understand wanting to see something that's newer and faithful to the original look. In saying that, I think it's odd that the classic curved energy sword appeared in the cutscene in the multiplayer, but not the campaign, which used the angular look of later games. The cutscenes themselves are the biggest overhaul from the original. They used to be rendered in-game but have now been replaced with pre-rendered cinematics. Blur Studios have done an amazing job translating the cinematography of the original with a more lifelike, almost photorealistic performance. My only issue is that the transition between gameplay and cutscenes becomes jarring, since it feels as though these two elements take place across parallel universes instead of a cohesive experience. In the original, you felt as though your actions had an impact on your surroundings, since the enemies you fought also appeared in the cutscene. But I think the core issue here is that there's a clear gap in visual fidelity. It works in a game like Halo Wars 2, because I think players understand that you can't really get a nuanced performance from an over-the-head perspective, because the alternative is this.
You! Tell the General what you told me!
The Atlanteans, sir. They invaded the island.
What?
They were building a temple to Uranus. They attacked the colony.
I don't believe it!
The gameplay remains unchanged, which is perfectly fine. Halo 2 is pretty much defined by its glitches and exploits, which couldn't be ironed out in time by Bungie. The most memorable part of the game, at least for me, is just goofing off and breaking boundaries, and seeing areas from a place you were never meant to be in. There's a certain wonder to it that was just missing or outright non-existent in future Halo games. To take away this aspect would also remove a good majority of Halo 2's identity, and I'm glad that it's mostly remained intact. Performance-wise, it seems fine, but lagging and freezing happen to be pretty common when loading new areas, which isn't very fun. It's clear that more work needs to be done to smoothen out the experience, because the alternative is lowering the graphics below the original settings, which doesn't sound very ideal to me. So if the gameplay is the same, why even talk about it in the first place? It's less about the mechanics so much as the visuals that affect gameplay. Halo 2's simplistic visuals allowed players to easily identify the silhouettes of enemies and objects, which is now obscured by particle effects and environmental detail. Sometimes it's so bad that you literally cannot make out what's happening right in front of you. In cases like these, it's better to default to classic mode, as the added clarity is more beneficial than some pretty textures. And if you're playing on Legendary, you're going to need all the help you can get. What I can appreciate is that the geometry more or less matches with its classic counterpart, which was an issue that the first game had. The first-person animations for the most part remain unchanged, which is both good and bad. For one, it ensures a smooth transition between both graphics, but the drawback is that the anniversary graphics inherit the somewhat unrefined animations of the original. Some weapons move just slightly out of sync with the hand models, which doesn't sell the illusion that it's a real, tangible thing within the game's world. The reload animations are overly simplistic and weightless compared to Combat Evolved. And Chief still holds his battle rifle at an awkward palm spread. Maybe the only aspect in this regard where the remaster fails is the new Furor gun model, which simply doesn't even fit. I have to wonder how this got past testing without someone noticing. I would have liked to have seen some polish in this area. It may not seem like much, but small details like these bring games closer to a modern standard, which is clearly what these anniversary editions are all about. You can see or maybe hear it in the new sound design. Compare the old, weak and unsatisfying SMG to the new and improved version. Consistency between the campaign and the multiplayer has been something these anniversary editions seem to struggle with. Halo Anniversary used Reach's multiplayer with remixed maps from Halo CE, and with H2A, Certain Affinity handled the multiplayer component, which ended up being a modified version of Halo 4 to emulate the gameplay of Halo 2 without the button glitches. Before we begin, I guess I should note that I'm not exactly great at multiplayer. I would consider myself more of a casual, and I tend to spend most of my time in the social playlists. I'm not a pro player or anything, so keep that in mind. Now, let's start with the visuals. It looks like Halo 4. Now, Halo 4 is a decent looking game, but when you put it side to side with Halo 2, there's a clear difference here. This is supposed to be Halo 2 Anniversary multiplayer, Yet it's hard to feel that way when the entire aesthetic is far removed from the game it's based on. The lighting itself also isn't that great, often making areas too dark to the point where increasing the gamma is pretty much necessary. The map selection is perhaps the most disappointing part. At the end of its lifespan, Halo 2 had 25 maps. The anniversary? 7. Most of the remade maps themselves are great, and the new interactive elements and vehicles are neat additions. The problem is that while quality will always trump quantity, variety is also the spice of life, and Halo 2 Anniversary's map selection is lacking in that department. You could say that the Forge can make up for it, but Forge maps usually don't have the same polish as dev-made maps, nor the visual appeal since they don't have pre-baked lighting or interesting geometry. Forge maps also rarely appear in multiplayer rotations from my experience. Whether or not more official maps are added is up to 343, and given how not many people play its multiplayer, I don't see it happening anytime soon. That being said, the Forge does allow for the potential of creative custom game types, if and when a custom games browser is implemented. Gameplay-wise, it's a very casual experience. Weapons in general have a more forgiving bullet magnetism and aim assist, which was carried over from Halo 4. What this means is, precision weapons are the easiest they've ever been to use, and because they're hit scan, it's impossible to play games like BTB without being lasered from across the map. If you still have Jackal Sniper PTSD to this very day, I do not recommend this mode. I found the 4v4 maps with its smaller size to be much more enjoyable, since the smaller spaces allow for more of its weapon sandbox to be viable rather than ignored, and that's where I've spent the majority of my time. As a filthy casual, the multiplayer is just fine, and it's a shame that it wasn't given the time needed to truly make it a refined experience. It also doesn't help that MCC's matchmaking is borderline abysmal, pairing you against teams far beyond your skill level that only encourages more people to quit, which is already a huge problem affecting multiplayer. But that's a story for another time. It's clear that the developers listened to what players had to say for Halo CE Anniversary, and it's good to see that their attempt at Halo 2 was mostly a step in the right direction when it came to the various stylistic choices they made. They didn't get everything exactly right. The particle effects were overdone, which made things hard to see, the transition to cutscenes was a bit too jarring for me, and the new graphics are held back by the legacy animations of the original. And I really do wish the multiplayer was truly built from the ground up to be its own unique experience, rather than an attempt at making Halo 4 play like Halo 2. But I think the main takeaway here is that Halo 2 Anniversary's campaign worked because it didn't try to radically redefine Halo 2's art style. It celebrated it. But more importantly, they didn't try anything wacky and stupid. They took the safe route, and made what was there just better. Halo 3 has yet to receive the same treatment, and it's unclear why that is. Whatever the reason, I can only hope that they take the lessons learned from the first two games to make a perfect remaster, however long it takes.